Imagine a world seized by the greatest economic upheaval in the history of humanity. The year is 1933. The Great Depression in the United States of America has reached its apex, and in Europe the shadows of an impending catastrophe begin to gather. It is in this year that an event cloaked in mystery occurs. The print runs of a single specific book begin to be systematically withdrawn from public access and from booksellers. It was not a political manifesto or a forbidden religious text in the usual sense. It was the work of Charles Francis Haanel titled The Master Key System. The official reasons for the withdrawal varied from religious protests to the anxieties of the industrial elite, who feared that the methods set forth in the book would render the masses too independent and ungovernable. There is a historically verified fact that for decades this book was passed hand to hand as a rare copy, becoming a secret foundation for those who would later define the shape of the 20th century. You may believe the legend that this very text was found by a young Bill Gates in the Harvard Library before he left school and founded his empire, or you may regard it as merely a beautiful myth. But one point remains indisputable. Haanel's influence on the formation of modern success psychology and cognitive science cannot be overstated. To grasp the depth of the 19th lesson you are now undertaking, one must become aware of the personality of its creator. Charles Haanel was not a theorist or a cloistered philosopher. He was born on May 22, 1866 in Ann Arbor, Michigan. But his development as a person and as a titan of industry took place in St. Louis. In those days, St. Louis was a boiling cauldron of American industry, a city where fortunes were forged and destinies shattered. Haanel began his path as a modest office worker in an enameling and stamping company. Yet his mind operated differently from those around him. He saw structure where others saw chaos. By the turn of the 20th century, he had become president of the Continental Commercial Company, one of the largest business empires of its time, uniting coffee and sugar plantations with an extensive distribution network. Haanel was the living embodiment of his ideas. In 1912, he resolved to systematize his experience and knowledge into 24 lessons that were mailed out weekly. It was an elite course for industrialists, bankers, and thinkers. Among his followers are named Napoleon Hill, author of the bestseller Think and Grow Rich *, who in a personal letter to Haanel in 1919 acknowledged that the Master Key System had helped him structure his own philosophy. Earl Nightingale, whose voice inspired millions in the mid-century, and even Oprah Winfrey, who in her interviews repeatedly returned to the principles laid down by Haanel more than 100 years earlier. The 19th lesson of the Master Key System is devoted to a theme that today sounds more relevant than ever: mental food. Haanel asserts that your mind digests thoughts exactly as your stomach digests physical food. It is not merely a beautiful metaphor. It is a fundamental law of biology and metaphysics. You are not only what you eat, but also what you think. Haanel writes in this lesson that what you regularly consume in your mental space inevitably becomes your flesh and your reality. If you fill your mind with news of anxiety, conflict, toxic discussions, and cheap, superficial content, you feed your intellect fast food. The result is predictable: mental obesity, cognitive sluggishness, and an inability to concentrate deeply. Haanel emphasizes deep concentration on the object of thought for several minutes each day is the most powerful exercise available to man. He warns you that appearance is deceptive. The world is in a state of constant change, and what seems to you a solid reality is in fact only a ripple on the surface of an ocean of energy. In 1912, Haanel preempted discoveries that modern science would confirm only a century later. In 2013, neuroscientist Gregory Burns of Emory University conducted a study using functional magnetic resonance imaging on 21 students. The results were striking. Reading a deep literary novel altered neuronal connectivity in the left temporal cortex, the region responsible for language and sensory motor responses, and these changes persisted for 5 days after reading. Reading literally builds your brain, physically reshaping its architecture. When you choose where to direct your attention, you choose your biological destiny. Michael Goldstein, in a study published in Frontiers in Psychology in 2014, proved that even background listening to anxiety-laden news raises blood cortisol by 17% and markedly slows the body's recovery from stress. You may think the news simply passes you by, but your endocrine system perceives it as a direct threat to survival. Gary Small, psychiatrist at the University of California, Los Angeles, in 2008, showed that intensive task switching in a digital environment and consumption of fragmentary content remodels the prefrontal cortex in just 1 week. We form what scientists call continuous partial attention, a state in which the mind is never fully here and now. Haanel reaches back to the ancient roots of this truth. He reminds us of the Pythagoreans of the 6th century BC. Pythagoras forbade his disciples from listening to bad music, considering it a direct poisoning of the soul. For him, the harmony of sounds was equivalent to the harmony of the cosmos, and dissonant information was perceived as a toxin that destroyed the inner order of man. The Stoics, whose wisdom survived millennia, spoke of the same. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations written in the 2nd century AD, in Book 5 verse 16, left us this covenant: the mind is colored by the hue of your thoughts. If your thoughts are gray and full of fear, your life cannot be bright and bold. In the Eastern tradition there is the principle of Sozen, a practice not merely of Zen Buddhist cuisine but of nourishment for the spirit, where each ingredient, each thought, is chosen with utmost awareness. In the Jewish tradition, Talmudic texts are often likened to bread. This is no casual comparison. Bread gives strength to the body, and the study of sacred texts gives substance to the soul. Haanel unites these ancient teachings with the pragmatism of Western industrialism. He tells you your life is the result of your mental metabolism. Consider the example of Thomas Edison, a contemporary of Haanel. Edison was known for his capacity for incredible concentration. He could sit for hours in a state of deep contemplation, cutting off all external irritants. This was not an innate talent, it was the training of a mental diet. Edison did not waste time on idle chatter or tabloid reading. He fed his mind with blueprints, scientific data, and the silence. Nikola Tesla, another great contemporary, possessed the ability to visualize his inventions with such precision that he could run them in his imagination and weeks later test the wear of the parts. This is the highest form of mental concentration that Haanel describes in the 19th lesson. Tesla literally built his reality from mental substance before it manifested in copper and steel. Haanel's ideas also echo in the fate of Steve Jobs. Though Jobs lived in a later era, his obsession with simplicity and design purity was a direct consequence of his mental diet. He practiced Zen meditation, rigorously filtered the information he consumed, and believed that concentration and simplicity are the keys to mastering reality. Like Haanel, Jobs understood that to create something great outwardly, one must first bring impeccable order inward. The 19th lesson calls you to action. It is not merely theory, it is a summons to a 7-day mental diet. Haanel proposes that you replace 30 minutes of daily news consumption with 30 minutes of reading classic literature or deep philosophical works. He demands that you remove at least one toxic app from your digital sphere that induces feelings of inadequacy or irritation. And most importantly, add 15 minutes of absolute silence. In this silence, you must observe the quality of your thoughts at week's end. Consider the neuroplasticity described by Norman Doidge in his seminal 2007 work The Brain That Changes Itself Doidge proves that our thoughts can alter the physical structure of the brain even in mature age. Each time you choose a deep thought over a superficial one, you strengthen the neuronal connections responsible for intellect and will. You literally reprogram your biological computer. Bruce Lipton, eminent biologist and author of The Biology of Belief goes further, showing through epigenetic principles how our thoughts and perception of the environment influence gene expression. Your mental food dictates to your cells how to function. You are not a slave to your genetics. You are the architect of your biology by mastering your attention. Haanel stresses that most people live in a state of mental sleep. They consume what the surrounding environment imposes, unaware that they become the product of that environment. He quotes ancient Hermetic texts ascribed to Hermes Trismegistus. That which is above is also below. That which is within is also without. If inside you reigns chaos of borrowed opinions and fears, your outer life will mirror that chaos. In 1982, physicist Alain Aspect conducted an experiment confirming quantum entanglement. The discovery showed that particles once linked continue to influence one another instantly, regardless of distance. Haanel intuitively grasped this observer-observed connection. Your thought is not merely an internal event, it is a quantum signal that structures the surrounding field of probabilities. When you embark on the practice of the 19th lesson, you must realize that you are stepping onto the path trod by humanity's greatest minds. The Yoga Vasishta, one of the oldest Indian texts, declares the world is merely a reflection of consciousness. If consciousness is pure and focused, the world obeys its will. Haanel translates this mystical truth into the language of Western success. He tells you that your ability to concentrate on a single thought for several minutes without distraction is precisely the master key that opens any door. Look at the history of Andrew Carnegie, who rose from a poor immigrant to the richest man of his time. Carnegie possessed the ability to direct his entire mind to one task, ignoring everything else. He understood the value of mental discipline. Napoleon Hill, studying Carnegie's life at his behest, concluded that the secret of success lies in goal definiteness and the purity of mental focus. These ideas permeate every lesson of Haanel, but it is in the 19th lesson that they reach their apex through the food metaphor. You must understand that each of your choices, what article to read, what video to watch, with whom to debate, is an act of self-creation. You cannot ingest mental poison and expect your life to be healthy and flourishing. Haanel calls you to become the guard at the gate of your mind. You must filter incoming information with the same exactness with which a jeweler selects gems. In the context of the modern age, when social media algorithms battle for every second of your attention, Haanel's words sound like a saving circle. We live in an attention economy where your attention is the most valuable resource you possess. If you do not manage it yourself, others will manage it for their own interests. Haanel teaches you to reclaim power over your mind. He reminds you that true strength is not in possessing information, but in the ability to process it and transform it into character and action. Your mental diet determines your vibrational frequency. This notion, frequently encountered in the works of Haanel's followers, rests on strict logic. If your thoughts are directed toward creation, harmony, and the understanding of fundamental laws, you enter resonance with the universe's creative forces. If, however, you are consumed by criticism, condemnation, and fear, you isolate yourself from those forces. Haanel insists that the law of attraction, spoken of so often today, operates not through wishes but through the correspondence of your inner essence to your outer circumstances, and your essence is formed by what you feed your mind day after day. The practice Haanel proposes at the end of this lesson seems deceptively simple, yet do not let that simplicity mislead you. Sustaining a strict mental diet for 7 days is far harder than giving up sugar or fast food. You will encounter fierce habit resistance. Your brain, accustomed to cheap dopamine spikes from checking notifications or reading scandalous headlines, will rebel. It will demand its usual portion of mental junk. At that moment, you must recall Haanel's words that you are the master of your mental house, not its slave. Recall the Stoic Epictetus, who taught that the only thing truly within our power is our attitude toward things and our thoughts. All else, wealth, health, reputation, can be taken from us at any moment. Yet the quality of our inner world remains forever. Haanel takes this Stoic wisdom and turns it into a tool for material world success. He shows that inner dominion inevitably leads to external triumph. The 19th lesson is a watershed. Up to this point, you studied the mechanisms of the mind, its connection to the universal mind, and visualization methods. Now Haanel moves to the question of substance. What do you build your visualizations from? What is the quality of the material you supply to your subconscious mind for manifestation in the physical world? If you construct a house from rotten boards, no amount of architectural genius will save it from collapse. Your mental food is those very boards, bricks, and cement from which the edifice of your destiny is built. Haanel quotes Kabbalah, pointing out that the word is an instrument of creation, yet before a word is spoken it must be formed in thought. And thought is formed from the ocean of information in which you swim. You must consciously choose the currents you enter. The ancient sages spoke of the importance of satsanga, association with the wise and dwelling in a beneficial environment. Haanel translates this into modern terms. Choose your authors, your interlocutors, and your information sources as if your life depended on it, because in the long run it truly does. Haanel's influence on Napoleon Hill was so profound that in the law of success Hill almost verbatim repeats Haanel's ideas about mental hygiene. Hill wrote that the mind is the only thing over which a person has complete and absolute control, and that control begins with what you allow into your mind. If you let weeds of fear and doubt grow in your mental garden,
they will choke any seeds of success you attempt to plant. The 19th lesson teaches you to recognize those weeds early. Each time you feel a sting of envy while viewing someone's achievements on social media, or a wave of baseless anxiety after the evening news, you are ingesting poison. Haanel urges you to be ruthless in this matter. No information is worth the loss of your inner peace and mental clarity. You must realize that the world you see around you, with its crises, conflicts, and problems, is merely one projection. Haanel asserts that another world exists, a world of eternal principles and unlimited possibilities, which opens only to those whose mind is sufficiently pure to perceive it. This is not escapism, it is a transition to a higher level of functioning. When your mind is imbued with ideas of power, harmony, and creation, you begin to see possibilities where others see only obstacles. Recall Oprah Winfrey, who rose from deep poverty and trauma to become one of the most influential women on the planet. She repeatedly emphasized that her success began with changing what she read and thought. She consciously chose books and ideas that expanded her consciousness rather than narrowed it. This is the living application of Haanel's 19th lesson. She altered her mental diet, and that altered her genetic and social trajectory. Haanel stresses that the process of assimilating mental food occurs in the subconscious. Your conscious mind is merely the gatekeeper. Its task is to filter. But once a thought is admitted inside, it begins its work. It connects with other thoughts, creates new associative links, and ultimately crystallizes into belief. And belief is the lens through which you view the world. If your lens is cloudy and dirty, the world will appear hostile and gray. If it is clear, you will perceive the true nature of reality, a boundless field of potential. Concluding the first part of our immersion in the 19th lesson, ask yourself, what have you mentally consumed in the past 24 hours? Were they ideas that inspire growth, or mere waste that leaves only emptiness and fatigue? Haanel does not ask you to take him on faith. He offers you an experiment. 7 days, 1 week of conscious consumption. This modest price grants you the key to governing your own life. Remember that every great person whose name endures in history was first and foremost a great consumer of ideas. They did not waste their attention. They knew that time is the fabric of life, and attention is the needle that weaves that fabric into a particular pattern. What pattern are you stitching now? Haanel reminds you that you are the master tailor of your destiny, and the thread you use is your thoughts. In the next part, we will dissect more fully the mechanics of how deep concentration reshapes our reality, and what further scientific evidence corroborates Charles Haanel's intuitive insights made more than a century ago. We will plunge into the practice of silence and discover why exactly 15 minutes of quiet can become the most productive time of your day. But for now, your task is to recognize yourself as the guard of your mind. You stand at the gate, only you decide who or what will enter. To understand how mental food transforms our biological reality, we must turn to the forefront of contemporary science, which a century after Haanel's publication began confirming his intuitive insights with alarming precision. At the beginning of the 20th century, the prevailing belief was that the adult brain was static, as unchanging as set concrete. Yet in 2007, Dr. Norman Doidge, in his seminal work **The Brain That Changes Itself**, presented a different picture. He proved that the brain is not a mechanism but a living, constantly changing landscape that remodels itself in response to every thought and every external influence. One of the most vivid confirmations of this theory was the famous Eleanor Maguire experiment conducted in 2000 with London taxi drivers. To obtain a license, these men had to learn the knowledge, a map of 25,000 streets and thousands of landmarks within a 6-mile radius of Charing Cross. MRI scans showed that after 4 years of intensive training, the posterior hippocampus, the brain region responsible for spatial memory, had physically enlarged. This was not a temporary change. The brain literally grew new tissue to accommodate the ingested information. Haanel wrote that thought becomes flesh, and Maguire's experiment visualized that process. Mental effort turned into gray cells, but the assimilation of mental food goes even deeper, into the very foundation of our biology, our genes. For a long time, DNA was regarded as an immutable blueprint dictating our fate. Bruce Lipton, eminent biologist and author of the epigenetics concept, overturned that view. He proved that genes do not govern our lives. They are governed by signals from outside the cell, and the chief source of those signals is the chemistry of our blood, which in turn is determined by our thoughts and perceptions. When you consume mental food that evokes fear or anger, your brain releases cortisol and adrenaline. These substances bathe your cells, forcing genes into survival mode and suppressing the immune system. A striking study by Brian Diaz and Kerry Ressler in 2014 showed how deep this effect runs. They exposed mice to the scent of black locust while simultaneously delivering mild electric shocks. Soon the mice began to tremble at the mere scent. The astonishing part came later. The offspring of those mice, who never saw their parents and never experienced the shocks, displayed the same panic response to the scent. Fear had been written into their epigenetic code. This validates Haanel's claim that the mental diet we follow shapes not only our own lives, but also the biological inheritance of future generations. We literally feed our unborn children with the thoughts we choose today. The link between the world of ideas and the world of matter is also forged by peptides, informational molecules, which Dr. Candace Pert, in her book Molecules of Emotion called the biological correlate of consciousness. In 1997, she demonstrated that each emotion possesses a specific chemical formula. When you focus on a thought, your body instantly creates the corresponding chemical cocktail. Studies by Gleiser and Kai-Colt-Gleiser on medical students showed that during exam stress, when their mental food consisted solely of anxiety and pressure, their immune cells, the natural killers, nearly ceased to function. Wounds healed 40% slower than during vacation. This is direct proof that toxic thoughts are not merely metaphorical but a real poison for the organism. The power of mental impact on biology is perhaps most vividly illustrated by the placebo effect. In 1955, Henry Beecher established that 30 to 60% of patients achieve genuine physical healing after taking a sugar pill, provided they believe in its efficacy. The thought of healing triggers in the brain the same dopamine and endorphin pathways as real medicines. This means the mind can synthesize any needed pharmacy within its own body, if supplied with the proper mental food in the form of conviction and visualization. If we look to quantum physics, we see that Haanel preempted discoveries later articulated by Alain Aspect in 1982. His quantum entanglement experiment proved that particles once interacting remain linked at any distance. Altering one instantly alters the other. This corroborates Haanel's philosophical thesis of the unity of all that is. Your mental food is not an isolated process. Consuming higher-order ideas tunes your personal frequency to resonate with the field of infinite potential that physicists call the quantum vacuum or zero-point field. Ancient civilizations grasped this truth millennia before MRI and quantum computers. In the emerald tablets of Hermes Trismegistus, in the tractate Poimandres*, the first and greatest law of the universe is proclaimed: all is thought. The universe is a mental image. Hermetic tradition taught that the mind is a vessel, and what fills it determines the quality of a person's life. If the mind is filled with the darkness of ignorance, it becomes heavy and drags the soul down toward material decay. If it feeds on the light of gnosis, it becomes light and rises toward creation. The Buddha Shakyamuni, in the very first stanza of the Dhammapada*, declared, "Thoughts are the forerunners of all states. Thoughts are their masters, they are created by them." Buddhist psychology treats consciousness as a stream constantly colored by the objects that enter it. In Zen tradition, there is the concept of sozen, not merely a vegetarian diet, but an art of feeding the spirit. Ancient masters taught that listening to bad music or engaging in empty chatter is equivalent to consuming rotten food. They knew the mind takes the form of whatever it concentrates upon. In the Indian epic Yoga Vasishta*, one of humanity's deepest philosophical texts, the sage Vasishta explains to Prince Rama that the world is merely a long dream of the mind. As the thought, so the experience, he says. Vasishta stresses that liberation is achieved not through physical exercises, but through the strictest discipline of mental consumption, through the selection of ideas that lead to awareness of unity with Brahman. Kabbalistic teaching about Ein Sof, the infinite, states that the divine light continuously pours into the world, yet man can receive only that portion for which he has prepared kelim, vessels. Those vessels are formed by our thoughts and desires. If our thoughts are selfish and limited, our vessels are small and fragile. The study of the Talmud and the Torah in this tradition is often likened to partaking of bread. Sacred texts are not merely information. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations wrote, "Your mind will be what your frequent thoughts are, for the soul is colored by the hue of thoughts." He advised his students to be extremely selective about which impressions they admit into their inner fortress. Epictetus, a former slave turned great philosopher, taught that the only thing truly belonging to a person is his judgment. He asserted that we are not disturbed by things themselves, but by our interpretation of them. That interpretation is the mental food we choose to digest. If you label an event catastrophe, you consume poison. If you call it lesson, you consume medicine. Bodhidharma, who brought Shan Buddhism to China, spent 9 years in contemplation of a cave wall, demonstrating the ultimate form of mental concentration that Haanel wrote about. He taught direct transmission beyond words, understanding that true mental food is not concepts but a state of pure awareness. This state of silence, which Haanel recommends for 15 minutes each day, is the moment when the mind ceases to consume external surrogates and begins to feed from the primary source, the universal mind. History furnishes countless examples of how strict adherence to the principles of mental diet transformed ordinary people into titans of spirit and industry. One of the most devoted disciples of Haanel was Earl Nightingale. In 1956, he recorded a short phonograph titled The Strangest Secret. In it, he formulated the essence of Haanel's writing: "We become what we think about most of the time." That recording became the first audio course in history to achieve gold status, circulating over 1 million copies without any advertising. Nightingale recounted that his life changed the moment he realized his mind is fertile soil, indifferent to whether you plant seeds of success or weeds of failure. It simply grows what is sown. He became the living embodiment of the 19th lesson, daily disciplining his mind and feeding it only the greatest ideas of humanity. Napoleon Hill, author of the bestseller Think and Grow Rich spent 20 years studying the lives of 500 of the most successful people of his era at the behest of steel magnate Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie, himself deeply familiar with the principles set forth by Haanel, understood that success is not the result of luck but the result of a specific mental configuration. Hill discovered that all these individuals, from Thomas Edison to Henry Ford, possessed the capacity for extraordinary concentration on a single thought for extended periods. Edison could spend days in his laboratory without noticing hunger or fatigue because his mind was wholly absorbed by the image of the forthcoming invention. That was his primary mental food. He literally ate the idea of the electric lamp until it materialized in the physical world. Nikola Tesla possessed an even more phenomenal capacity. He needed no blueprints. In his autobiographical notes, he described how he built complex machines in his imagination, set them in motion, and left them to work for weeks. He then examined them in his mind for wear. This was the ultimate form of the exercise Haanel describes in the 19th lesson. deep concentration on the object of thought. Tesla fed his mind pure mathematical and geometric forms, and that diet enabled discoveries that outpaced his time by centuries. In the more recent era, Steve Jobs demonstrated how even aesthetic mental food can alter the course of history. His fascination with calligraphy at Reed College seemed a waste of time. Yet Jobs later acknowledged that those studies shaped his sense of beauty and typography that underpinned the first Macintosh. He often spoke of connecting the dots backward. Every grain of quality information, every image of high art he consumed, became part of his mental architecture. Jobs was famed for his ruthless ability to say no to 1,000 things in order to focus on one. This is Haanel's diet in action, the pruning of informational noise to concentrate on the essential. Oprah Winfrey, one of the most influential women of our time, repeatedly stated that Charles Haanel's Master Key System had a colossal impact on her. She grew up in extreme poverty and violence, where her mental food consisted of hopelessness and fear. She chose to change her diet. She began reading books that expanded her horizons and practiced visualizing a life that seemed impossible for a girl from Mississippi. Oprah became a master of conscious idea consumption. She created an environment that constantly fed her spirit, leading to a media empire built on mindfulness and growth. These examples show that the gap between mediocrity and greatness lies not in talent but in the discipline of attention. Haanel asserts that most people allow their thoughts to wander like stray dogs rummaging through trash bins. They consume news of disasters, gossip about celebrities, and anxious forecasts, then wonder why their lives are chaotic and deficient. Great people treat their attention as a sacred resource. They know that each minute spent concentrating on a goal is a brick in the building of their future reality. Haanel stresses that appearance is deceptive. The world we see around us is merely a frozen past, the result of yesterday's thoughts. True reality is in constant motion, pliable to the one who knows how to wield the power of thought. What appears solid matter is in fact only a ripple on the surface of an infinite ocean of energy. When you change your mental food, you change the frequency of that ripple. Gary Small of the University of California, Los Angeles in 2008 conducted a study showing that merely 5 days of intensive internet use and task switching remodel the prefrontal cortex. We begin to lose the ability for deep reading and prolonged concentration. We become victims of continuous partial attention, the very state Haanel warned against. If your mental food is served in tiny, fragmented, meaningless bites, your mind becomes fragmented. You lose the capacity to hold the master key. Therefore, the 19th lesson proposes a radical practice, a 7-day mental diet. It is not merely an exercise, it is a detox of the soul. Haanel asks you to replace 30 minutes of news consumption with 30 minutes of classic literature or philosophical texts that have stood the test of time. Why is this important? Because great books are concentrated mental food. Reading Marcus Aurelius or Emerson puts you in direct contact with their consciousness. Your neural network begins to vibrate in unison with their thoughts. As Gregory Burns demonstrated in 2013, reading a quality novel leaves a neural imprint in the left temporal cortex for 5 days after reading. You literally carry the author's thoughts in your head, and they continue to work on your brain's structure. Removing one toxic app from your phone is another step in this diet. Modern social networks are engineered to trigger micro-dopamine releases, keeping us in a state of perpetual informational hunger that cannot be satisfied. This is fast food for the mind, nutrient-free but addictive. Haanel calls us to reclaim authority over our attention. Adding 15 minutes of silence is the culmination of the exercise. In silence, the process of digestion occurs. Without silence, information remains a piled-up load, never transforming into wisdom and power. In those 15 minutes, you must do nothing, plan nothing, think nothing actively. Simply allow the mental food you have taken in during the day to be assimilated. This is the moment when consciousness merges with the subconscious and new ideas begin to integrate into your personality. You will notice by week's end that the quality of your thoughts has shifted. You will become calmer. Your reactions to external irritants will be less automatic. You will begin to see opportunities where before you saw only obstacles. This is not magic. It is biology and metaphysics working in tandem. You have simply stopped poisoning yourself and begun giving your mind what it was created for: light, order, and creative energy. Remember Haanel's words, "You are an exact copy of the universal mind." If the universal mind is infinite, creative, and harmonious, then you by nature possess those qualities. The only thing preventing their expression is the mental waste we voluntarily admit into our lives. Cleanse your temple, become a discriminating eater in the world of ideas. Choose only that which is worthy of your divine origin. Every thought you permit into your consciousness is either a seed that will bear fruit in your life or a weed that will drain your strength. You are the gardener of this garden. The 19th lesson gives you the tools to turn that garden into paradise. But remember that knowledge of these principles is worthless without application. You may read thousands of books on nutrition, but your body changes only when you begin to eat different food. The same holds for your mind. In the next concluding part of our study of the 19th lesson, we will move to the deepest aspects of transformation. We will learn how mental food influences our intuitive capacity and how, through concentration, we can not merely adapt to reality but literally dictate its terms. We will parse Haanel's final instructions for cementing the results of the 7-day diet and understand how to make this process a way of life rather than a single experiment. But for now, simply be the guard. Watch every thought that attempts to cross the threshold of your mind. Ask it, "Do you bring me life or do you bring me decay?" And have the courage to slam the door on that which does not serve your greatness. But now, simply be the guard. Watch every thought that attempts to cross the threshold of your mind. Ask it, "Do you bring me life or do you bring me decay?" And have the courage to slam the door on that which does not serve your greatness. The principles set forth by Charles Haanel in the 19th lesson are not merely abstract metaphors. They are deeply rooted in the very structure of human consciousness and are continually confirmed both by ancient wisdom and by modern scientific discoveries. We see their manifestation in every facet of our culture, from personal development to the pinnacles of world sport and business. Consider how this idea of mental food permeates contemporary psychology. Carl Gustav Jung, the great Swiss psychiatrist, spoke of individuation, the process of becoming a whole person, integrating the conscious and the unconscious. This path requires constant mental work, confronting the shadow and the conscious selection of what we admit into our inner world. Individuation is, in essence, a careful selection and digestion of mental food necessary for the soul's growth. Abraham Maslow, pioneer of humanistic psychology, described peak experiences, moments of profound joy, clarity, and meaning when a person feels most alive and whole. These experiences often arise in states of deep engagement and concentration, when the mind is fully absorbed in constructive activity, whether creation, meditation, or solving a complex problem. That is the optimal mental nutrition that gives the soul energy and direction. Daniel Kahneman, Nobel laureate, in his work on thinking, distinguished two systems: System 1, fast, intuitive, emotional, and System 2, slow, deliberate, logical. Our mental diet directly influences the balance between these systems. If we constantly ingest informational fast food, anxiety-laden news, and superficial content, we strengthen System 1, becoming more reactive and less capable of deep analysis. Conversely, purposeful reading, reflection, and concentration fortify System 2, granting us awareness, control, and the ability to make considered decisions rather than impulsive reactions. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, the Hungarian-American psychologist, introduced the notion of flow, a state of complete immersion in an activity when time loses meaning and the person experiences deep satisfaction. This state is the quintessence of ideal mental food, when the mind not only functions but flourishes, fully realizing its potential. In flow, we do not passively consume information, we actively interact with it, forging new neuronal connections and expanding the horizons of consciousness. Modern neurobiology merely confirms these intuitive insights. Dr. Norman Doidge, in his landmark book *The Brain That Changes Itself* 2007, presented extensive evidence of neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to remodel its structure and function in response to experience, thought, and learning.
Every thought you permit literally reshapes your brain, strengthening some neural pathways while weakening others. This is not metaphor, it is a biological fact. Your brain is living clay that you shape with your thoughts. Dr. Bruce Lipton, a pioneer in epigenetics, showed that our beliefs and perceptions of the environment, including our internal mental environment, can influence gene expression, determining which genes are turned on or off. This means mental food affects not only mind but also physiology, health, and even predisposition to disease. You literally become what you think at the cellular level. Even quantum physics, though not directly about mental food, offers philosophical parallels. Experiments like those conducted by Alan Aspect in 1982, demonstrating quantum entanglement, hint at a deep interconnection of all things, at the inseparability of observer and observed. This resonates with Haanel's idea that our mind does not merely passively receive reality but actively participates in its formation. These principles find practical application across diverse fields. In sport, great athletes intuitively or consciously use mental food to achieve extraordinary results. Michael Jordan, one of the greatest figures in basketball history, was known not only for his physical mastery but also for phenomenal mental resilience. He did not merely train his body, he mentally rehearsed every game, every shot, visualizing success in minute detail. His mind was fed a constant diet of confidence, discipline, and unshakable belief in victory. Kobe Bryant, his successor, elevated this philosophy into the Mamba mentality, an obsessive devotion to perfection, continual study of the game, opponents, and himself. He absorbed knowledge, analyzed every situation, turning his mind into a powerful instrument of domination. In business, the same principles underlie the success of giants such as Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon. His famous Day One philosophy is a perpetual drive for innovation, thinking like a startup, avoiding complacency. Bezos feeds his mind with principles of long-term thinking, customer obsession, and relentless self-improvement, not short-term profit or herd mentality. Elon Musk, visionary founder of SpaceX and Tesla, is known for his first principles thinking. Rather than accepting conventional solutions, he deconstructs problems to their fundamental truths, discarding all assumptions. His mind is nourished by pure logic, raw data, and fearless challenge of entrenched paradigms. Warren Buffett, legendary investor, has for decades demonstrated the power of patience, discipline, and deep analysis. He ignores market noise, resists panic, and feeds his mind only with proven principles of value investing and long-term perspective. Ancient civilizations understood this truth long before MRI and quantum computers. Hermes Trismegistus, the legendary sage to whom the Hermetic texts are ascribed, taught, "As above, so below, as within, so without." This axiom directly points to the fact that our internal mental landscape shapes our external reality. The Buddha taught that we are what we think. All that we are arises from our thoughts. With our thoughts, we create the world. His teaching on right thinking, mindfulness, and awareness is a detailed manual for selecting and digesting mental food. The Stoics, as already noted, emphasized that the only thing truly belonging to us is our thoughts, and they alone determine our happiness and suffering. Kabbalah, the mystical tradition of Judaism, describes 10 sephirot,